entertainment and a talk show host sort of vehicle as a kind of cover to assassinate the leader of North Korea. What's interesting about this film is, on the one hand, it's framed in the United States, in U.S. media, as a kind of free speech issue, but this is really a red herring. What's interesting to me about this is the fact that if you actually look at what the Sony executives did, they consulted very closely with the State Department, which actually gave the executives a green light with regard to the death scene. And they also consulted with a RAND North Korea watcher, a man named Bruce Bennett, who basically has espoused the thesis that the way to bring down the North Korean government is to assassinate the leadership. And he actually stated in consulting with Sony about this film that this film, in terms of the South Korean market, as well as its infiltration by defector balloon dropping organizations into North Korea, could possibly get the wheels of a kind of regime change plot into motion. So in this instance, fiction and reality have a sort of mirroring relationship to each other.
Well, Tim Shorrock, I'd like to ask you, this is extremely unusual to see a hacking of a private company become an international incident, in effect. But you're well aware of the close relationship between Hollywood and military authorities and the U.S. government historically. Could you talk about that?
Well, first of all, the person she just mentioned, Bruce Bennett, who was a consultant on this film, works for the RAND Corporation, which is a think tank for the U.S. military and has been for decades. And it so happens that the Sony CEO happens to sit on the board of directors of the RAND Corporation. Sony has extensive ties with the U.S. national security system. Its CIO used to work for the Secretary of Defense in terms of guarding their internal security. That's one point. But second, I think that, this attack began in late November, early December. At that time, this cyber attack was run by this group that you mentioned, this GOP, Guardians of Peace. They made no mention whatsoever of the film. It was all about Sony and its internal racism and that kind of thing. I have seen no indication whatsoever that there's any real similarity of this attack to anything that's North Korea has been accused of before. And, many cyber experts from, Kim Zetter of Wired, Mark Rogers and others have raised real questions about the FBI evidence. And so I think it's appalling that President Obama goes on a national stage, a global stage on Friday, and basically declares cyber war, and then a couple days later ratchets it back to some kind of like cyber nuisance, cyber vandalism. And of course North Korea is going to respond to basically a declaration of war by the President of the United States. And, we have a massive buildup going on in Asia, military buildup. And I think, we need to keep North Korea as the enemy, as the armed enemy that's going to attack us at any moment, so we can defend these bases in Japan, particularly in Okinawa, which are the focus of a massive public protest. You may have noticed, Americans didn't notice, but Okinawans and Japanese voted to pull these bases out in recent elections. They want the U.S. forward bases removed. So I think, there's a lot of political, situation going on here, a lot of politics going on that's completely unnoticed. And I think it's shameful of the New York Times once again to be in the leadership of, spinning out these claims, dubious claims, and, possibly instigating another war, another confrontation.
Tim Shorrock, I want to ask Christine Hung about the issue of what this means right now for North Korea and China relations and what evidence there is that, in fact, North Korea has hacked Sony. But, Tim, I wanted to ask you, would the U.S. allow a film that was about the assassination of a U.S. president?
Well, I can imagine what our response would be, not only to an assassination of our president, but showing his head being blown apart and his skull, flying all over the place. I mean, this is a racist kind of imagery for these white, rich stoners to be laughing to the bank all the way about this. I think is disgraceful and disgusting. It's not a matter of freedom of speech. I mean, these people, Seth Rogen and his pals over there at Sony, are just, the lowest of the low of the U.S. propaganda on North Korea. Look at the New York Times interview he did yesterday. He has no knowledge. He knows nothing about North Korea, the past of the United States, the U.S. bombing during the Korean War, the standoffs, the military crises over the last 20, 30 years, the cost to the Korean people of this militarization, the cost to the Korean people, North and South. All he's interested in is making money and getting stoned. And I think it's shameful that, people are all over Hollywood, George Clooney, are looking at this as some kind of big freedom issue, Well, let's look at the real role of the U.S. in Korea and try to, you can make comedies about Korea. You can make comedies like MASH, but let's have some humanity, let's have some humanity in these films.
Well, leaked emails between Sony producer Scott Rudin and Sony executive Amy Pascal are also making headlines. In one email, Pascal wrote, quote, "What should I ask the president at this stupid Jeffrey breakfast?" And Rudin responded, quote, "Would he like to finance some movies?" Pascal then wrote, "I doubt it. Should I ask him if he liked Django?" Rudin wrote back, 12 years. They then continued exchanging the names of other popular films with black actors, including The Butler and Think Like a Man, but executives later apologized.
Well, do we have are there North Korean agents all over Hollywood that really understand Hollywood like this and know who's who in these studios? I kind of doubt it. And I think it's, if you look at the early stories of this hack, which is important to do because before North Korea even came up as the source, there are many articles in the tech press and Hollywood press about this. And it shows, extensive knowledge of Sony, who is who, where their emails are kept, where all this stuff is kept inside their servers. I just find it ludicrous to think that the North Koreans, so isolated, so crude in their technology, have been able to completely penetrate and, almost destroy an American Hollywood studio like this.
Finally, Christine Hong, on the evidence of North Korea actually doing this hacking and the U.S. relationship with North Korea and China.
So I'd say a couple of things. One, just to continue something that Tim was saying, basically when it comes to North Korea, it's not as though Americans have a wealth of knowledge. Americans have a wealth of conviction and belief, but they have very little by way of knowledge, and even less so, as Tim mentioned, any knowledge about a very brutal, multi-decade legacy of U.S. interventionism on the peninsula and a policy of regime change that is several decades old that has essentially failed. But it's not likely because
we just have 30 seconds, Christine.
Okay. I would just say that, basically, just to go back to the narrative of Red Dawn 2, which basically swapped out China and replaced China with North Korea in post-production, in the post-production process. The U.S. policy toward Asia and the Pacific region, the Obama pivot policy, basically is aimed at containing China. But it uses the pretext of a nuclear-armed and dangerous North Korea as a very convenient devil function. And this has justified the acceleration of a missile defense system.
Christine, we have to leave it there. Christine Hong at the University of California. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
And every time I came home from Albany, I would walk into the front door of my house, and my kids would look up at me and say, "Well, Mom, did you ban fracking yet?" So today I'm going to go home, and I'm going to say, "Hey, Elijah, ask me that question again, okay? Just ask me again." Because now the answer is yes. Yeah, we did it.
New York says no to fracking after years of grassroots organizing.